if we talk about what Nostradamus might or might not have predicted, um, we have to start with the assumption that he actually had that power to begin with, that by whatever means it might have been, he was able to actually see or predict the future. Even if our intention would be to try and discredit him and try and disprove him, then we would still have to start with that assumption, and then, during the course of examining his prophecies in that light, either prove or disprove them. But in any case, we have to start with the assumption that he had that power, because if we, right from the beginning, assume that it was impossible for him to to have had that power, then we don't need to talk about what he might have predicted, right? If we don't, if we're not even giving it a chance, right, then it becomes pointless. And a lot of people who don't believe that he could predict anything have that kind of view. They might have looked at some of his predictions, and they're like, well, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't directly say that this and that is directly gonna happen on directly exactly that day and exactly this and that, and because it doesn't directly and overtly say things, they dismiss it and say, well, obviously it's all hogwash and you can interpret it anything you want into it because it's not direct. But the reason they dismiss it because of that is because they're not even trying to view it from the perspective of someone who might have actually had that power. So, and because of that, they can't understand it. And because let's pause for a second and assume someone in the Middle Ages, like Nostradamus, actually, for whatever reason, had the power to see or predict the future in any way, right? So then, of course, he wants to tell people about it, wants to warn people about it, and you'd assume he would just directly say, oh, yeah, tomorrow this king is gonna be murdered or something, right? Well, obviously he can't do that, right? He can't directly say stuff because, well, tomorrow is too short a time frame. But he didn't talk about things happening tomorrow, but he did talk about things happening in a few years from his time. Up until very much later, and we'll get to that in a second. And we already talked about that. I already made a video looking at the passages we're gonna look at now, but I want to look at it again because I want to really look at it in the light I'm trying to explain right now, right? And also, since the last video, I'm gonna cover the same passages I covered in the last video, but since the last video, I also, I found some more interesting stuff, and also some of you guys, have helped me and have helped me understand certain things, and so I want to do it again, and I want to get more into some specifics. But the key to really making sense of it is that your premise has to be he has had that power, right? Because he did actually also talk about things that just happened a few years from his time. So if he just directly says, "Oh yeah, in a few years, this and that king, will be deposed or will be executed," that will bring trouble to him, especially if it's in a time period where he's still alive. People would just accuse him of, having plotted the assassination to begin with or something. So you can't say stuff like that too directly for obvious reasons. So the whole argument that just because he didn't say things too directly, and because of that he couldn't predict the future, is baloney. Because, precisely if you were to actually very clearly see the future, you still couldn't publish a book where you say it that clearly. Especially if you're talking about things like assassinations, because people will just accuse you of having, planned those assassinations in the first place. But even if it's things that are in a far future, you still couldn't directly say, oh, exactly this and that is going to happen to exactly this and that person on exactly this and that day. Even if you were able to see it that clearly, you couldn't write it that clearly, again, for obvious reasons, because if you write it that clearly, guess what? It's not going to happen, because people are going to read your prediction and say, okay. Oh, tomorrow I will be killed, according to Nostradamus, if I go to this and that place. Oh, well, okay, then I won't go to that place then, right? So him not being too precise, isn't isn't a reason for dismissing him, because someone who would actually see the future, even very precise, couldn't actually, be too precise when publishing those predictions, because it would get him into trouble, or it would just prevent those things from happening in the first place, and then you wouldn't have a prediction. So you can't be too open about the prediction. On the one hand, of course, he wanted to publish them, and, he wanted to be open about it. But on the other hand, you can't be too open about it, especially if you really believe that you know the future. You can't be too open about it. So him not stating things too plainly is no reason to dismiss him, especially someone who really thought that he could predict the future would have to do it that way. So you have to really understand that part, and once you make, once you're clear about that, it also becomes easier to understand the way he's talking in, and and it's way easier to make sense of what he's saying. Try to see things from his perspective for a second. Suppose you would be the person in the Middle Ages who had the power to see the future. So how would you do it? Like I said, you can't just state things too plainly, and I already explained that. But on the other hand, you can't be too vague either, because if you're too vague, people are just not going to believe that you're predicting anything, and then you might as well not publish your predictions. So you'd have to find a middle ground where you're not stating things too much out in the open so as to get you into trouble, especially if you're talking about bad things happening. But you also wanted to be so on the one hand you wanted to be indirect, but on the other hand you wanted to be direct enough so as to people to at least figure out later, that you were actually predicting what was going to happen, right? Or at least for some people, not for the general public, but for some people to figure it out, right? Because at least you would want some people to figure it out. Otherwise, you don't need to publish your predictions in the first place. So how do you do that? Here's how I would do it. So the assumption is that I know the future, right? By whatever means, but I know the future, and I know it relatively well, right? That's the assumption. I can't state things too obvious, otherwise it would get me into trouble, especially in the Middle Ages, especially with the Catholic Church, and with heresy, and with the Inquisition still going on, and with a lot of political intrigue and infighting among the Catholic Church and among the monarchies and so on, But of course, I wanted to make sure that people get that at least some people, the people who wouldn't get me into trouble, that they understand what I'm talking about, and that they understand that I am really predicting the future. So how, prove to them that I really have that ability. So how would I do that? I would use colloquialism. Well, you know what I mean, like slang, colloquialisms, colloquialisms, slang, jargon, but not the slang of the present time, but the slang of the future, right? Um, if I really know the future, then I would, then I would know that, right? Then I would know the slang of the future. So I would write my predictions in the slang of the future, or even, if we're talking about the future anyway, even memes would be perfect, Of course, memes didn't really exist back then, and that's the entire point, I would use ways of communicating that only existed at the time that I'm talking about. That's perfect, because then the people in that time period will understand what I mean, whereas all the people who come before won't have a clue, so it won't get me into trouble. I also don't run the risk of preventing what is supposed to happen by predicting it, right? Because, like I said, if I read in some prophecy that if I go to Paris tomorrow, I will be assassinated. Well, then I won't go to Paris tomorrow, and then and then and then the prophecy is wrong. Now you might say, well, wouldn't that be a good thing? You'd think, the whole point of publishing prophecies like that would be to warn people. Yes, but you can't warn them too directly, because then nothing of what you're predicting is going to happen, and no one is going to believe your predictions anyway. Also, it's not like Nostradamus had a time machine, If we assume he had that power, I mean, how can we even assume that he had the power to see the future, The only way would be if he had a time machine given the level of technology back then, he probably didn't have, right? And I agree, he didn't have a time machine, right? So we can rule that out. He didn't have a time machine. Or at least it's very unlikely that he built a time machine, okay? So we can rule that out. So, of course, a lot of people say, well, he predicted the future using astronomy. Actually, not astronomy, astrology. A lot of people say that. Oh, he predicted the future using astrology. Actually, we can also rule that out. Why can we rule that out? It's because he's talking about very specific events. We already talked about that in the previous video, and I'm gonna talk about the same verses again in this video. So you'll see he's talking about very specific things happening to specific people at specific times. These are not things that you can deduce using astrology, especially 500 years before. You can't. Astrology, even, of course, the premise again would be that astrology even works to begin with, but even assuming that astrology works, all you can do with astrology is, you look at the star. How does astrology work? A lot of people don't get that. It's just you look at the stars, and of course, you have to use astronomy for astrology. Back then, astronomy and astrology were actually the same thing. And of course, astronomy back then was very limited. They didn't have as powerful telescopes as we have now, because astrology relies on astronomy. And if your knowledge about astronomy is limited, then necessarily your astrology is limited as well, because astrology is derived from astronomy. So in order to predict anything using astrology, you have all astrology is that you're looking at the stars, at the planets, at other galaxies, and so on, and you look at their movements, right? You look at what's happening there and over there and this star and this galaxy. Same with astronomy, right? You're just you're just doing astronomy. You're just looking at what's happening in the galaxy, right? And then you see certain patterns. You see, oh yeah, this galaxy is moving like this, and and those stars are moving like that, and they're going in that direction, and this is going to go there, and then there's going to be an increase, in gravitation over on that planet, and so on. you're just observing what's happening out there in the big universe, right? And then you start noticing certain patterns. And then you start, you start to deduce what's going to happen using those patterns. So if you see that a planet is moving in that direction, you know, you assume that it's gonna continue to move in that direction, right? And then you can calculate the position in like 10 years and so on, and then you can calculate what the universe is gonna look like in 10 years, for instance. I mean, just the position of the stars and the galaxies and the planets and so on. And the assumption there is, of course, that the way those are aligned, the way the cosmic bodies are aligned, has an effect on has a corresponding effect on humans and on human society and so on. And then you can, using that, you can, even if we're assuming that this even works to begin with, right? All you can do is make very, very general predictions, because you can't see any details. It doesn't get less detailed than that, because all you can predict is the movements of cosmic bodies. It's super, super not detailed. You're looking at the very big picture, the biggest picture. You're only looking at constellations and so on. You can predict what the constellations look like. You can see what the constellations predict. No, you can't even see it. All you can do is predict what the calculate what the constellations are going to look like in 10 years. And then you go like, oh, well, if the constellations are going to look like that in 10 years, it might have a kind of, very general effect in this or that area on human society. You can only make extremely general predictions. You can't see any specifics. You can't see what's gonna happen specifically on a specific day to a specific person. You can't see any specifics. It's just very general. You can say like, oh yeah, maybe there's, the constellations are like, aligned really bad in like 10 years. So probably maybe something bad is gonna happen. But what that bad thing might be, you have no idea, right? So it only allows for extremely general predictions, even if it even works to begin with, right? So we can rule out astrology as well, because Nostradamus' predictions, what Nostradamus talks about, be it true or false, and it is vague, but even with it being vague, it's way more specific than anything you could possibly know about using astrology. And he actually also, he curses astrology in the foreword to his book. So he actually dismisses astrology himself, right? So we can dismiss astrology. So if he didn't use astrology, and if he didn't have a time machine, how was he able to see the future? There's basically only one method left. And a lot of people don't even talk about that method because they don't believe in it, right? But if his predictions have some merit to them, that's the only way he could have used. And that's basically divine inspiration. Now, I'm not saying he's some religious figure. I'm not saying he could talk to God or Jesus or anyone. Not like that, but some kind of divine inspiration. Doesn't have to be God himself that showed up and told him what's gonna happen. Just very general, some kind of divine inspiration. Maybe he had some kind of vision. Maybe he went to sleep one night and had a dream, and then that dream, an angel showed up and showed him what's gonna happen, like John in the Bible, something like that. Something that literally involves a leap of faith. It had to be something like that, if it's true, because that's the only remaining explanation. Maybe divine was the wrong word, just some kind of higher being, okay? He was inspired by some kind of higher being. Now, I'm not saying that that's the case. I'm just saying that if his predictions are true, then that's the only remaining logical explanation, unless you can come up with another. So again, even if you don't believe in that, we have to start with that assumption, even if we wanted to disprove it, right? And since we already, pretty much discarded him having a time machine or him using astrology, if we can disprove that, we've pretty much disproven him. But to do that, we first have to assume that, that was actually the way he did it, because that's the only remaining way. And so how would that work, right? So he must have been inspired by some kind of higher being. Why would that allow him to know the future? Well, because then again, the assumption would have to be that that higher being would know the future. Why would a higher being know the future? Well, again, that higher being, whatever it might be, an angel, a devil, whatever. I'm not sure if a devil is a higher being, but okay, we're not even ruling that out. Maybe some of the accusations by some people in the Catholic Church were true, and he's like a heretic, and he's like practicing witchcraft and whatever. That would be a way to explain it as well, right? Well, of course, I don't like calling demons higher beings, but yeah. Well, it's still better than calling them divine beings. So we'll just continue with higher beings. So how would higher beings know the future? Again, I think we can rule out them having any kind of time machine, or at least okay, maybe not completely rule it out because we don't know, but just for the sake of argument, let's consider that unlikely. Of course, there might be beings that live in different dimensions, and maybe time works different in their dimension, and because of that, they already know what's gonna happen. Possible, but again, I think rather unlikely. The most likely explanation for how a higher being could know the future would simply be, well, since we're already believing in higher beings anyway, you know, just, for the sake of argument, then probably, those higher beings are there, especially if we're talking about divine beings, then those divine beings would probably be there, and that's what a lot of religions teach us, to help human society, to guide human society. So there would be some kind of divine plan, right? So no, those higher beings don't have a time machine, but they know what's gonna happen because they know the divine plan. They, being higher beings, know the plan that higher beings have for human society. So they can give someone like Nostradamus a vision about that, or an inspiration about that, or whatever. Why would they want to do that? Well, again, to help and guide people, right? Especially, if it is about some bad consequences, then they would being like, I don't know, compassionate or something, they would want to help people, maybe avoid that, or warn people about that. It's kind of like the message the angel gives to John of Patmos in Revelation. The whole reason for that is obviously because he's trying to the angel is trying people to behave better. He's like saying, well, he's talking to each of the Christian communities and saying, well, these things you did well, but here are your shortcomings. These things you did really badly, and you really have to improve on those shortcomings, because if you don't, it's gonna have bad consequences, and these are the bad consequences if you don't sober up, right? So the point would be to yes, warn people about possible consequences that might happen if they don't start behaving better. So again, the point would probably be to help human beings, to not hurt other people so much, to not sin so much, to warn them about the consequences if they continue to sin. So if we are talking about some kind of catastrophe, if we're predicting some kind of catastrophe, then the prediction would have to be worded in a way that, on the one hand, serves as warnings to people and possibly even helps them to try and avoid that catastrophe, but only as individuals, right? So maybe someone reads the prediction and he's like, oh my God, this horrible catastrophe is gonna happen. Oh, and it's because of our sins. So I better start becoming a good person and start not sinning, and these all these kinds of bad things might happen. So I better I better warn people and tell people, hey, be good people. Otherwise, it will have those bad consequences, and people are gonna laugh at him. Saying, well, this is stupid. This prediction doesn't say anything. Then you could interpret anything into that prediction. You're ridiculous. Go away. Stupid. Heretic. Whatever. You're stupid. You don't know anything. Idiot. Religious lunatic. Cult member. Heretic. Whatever. So he couldn't, you can't warn all the people anyway, because not all the people are going to believe it, and a lot of people are going to dismiss it. And it has to be worded in such a way that a lot of people are going to dismiss it, because if you say it too directly, everyone will believe it. And even the bad people to whom the calamity, was supposed to happen, they would be like, okay, I'm not gonna go to that place on that day, and so and then but because we're assuming it was a divine plan, then the divine plan couldn't happen. So obviously, the ones involved in that divine plan wouldn't do anything to jeopardize their divine plan. So all they can do is warn individuals, right? So that person who goes around telling people about that prophecy and no one believes him. Well, okay, so no one believes him, right? But he still believes it himself. So he's like, well, okay, no one believed me. They all think I'm, they're all laughing at me. They all think I'm crazy, and they all think I'm a conspiracy theorist or whatever. And, but he still believes it himself, right? So he won't go to that and that place on that and that date, right? And we already said that, Nostradamus can't say things too directly and can't say exactly what's going to happen on that and that day. Well, he does, but he does it in a way that, that is precisely in a way that not everyone would believe it, right? And that's precisely the way you would word it. And that's why, I think it would be a good idea to use terminology, to use slang, to use colloquialism of the time that we're talking about, because that way only people in that actual time period would get it. And my opinion is that's exactly what Nostradamus does. So let's start looking at the predictions now. I'm going to look at the same verses we looked at in the previous Nostradamus video, except I'm going to start one quatrain earlier, because I think that's actually interesting, and that's something I couldn't, because I myself didn't have that attitude, of focusing on him probably using terminology that, terminology of the future. I didn't understand that either, and that's why a lot of translators have problems translating it, because he uses a lot of terms that didn't actually exist at the time he was writing the text, right? So a lot of people have, a lot of translators, especially translators who translated it relatively early on, they don't know how to translate it because he uses words that didn't exist in his time period. And I wasn't aware of that either, so I just sort of glossed over the quatrain, the earlier quatrain that that comes before the quatrain I started last time. And the reason I started with the quatrain I started last time was because that's the only one that has a very precise date, and it's about modern times. So let's start with the one, the verse, one verse before that. The earth and air will freeze a very great sea when they will come to venerate Thursday. That which will be, never was it so fair. From the four parts they will come to honor it. Okay, I actually have no idea what any of that means. That's why I skipped that verse previously. But the only reason I'm including it this time is because it proves my point, that Nostradamus uses terminology that he couldn't have possibly known at that time. He uses terminology of the future. And this is by far not the only examples. You will see examples of that in the other verses as we go on. You see examples of that in pretty much every verse. But this verse has a very obvious example of it. And actually he uses that throughout his book. He's always talking about, look at this here, when they will come to venerate Thursday. And he uses that throughout his book. He always talks about venerating Thursday. He talks about the people who worship Thursday. He talks about the land where Thursday is worshipped, and so on. He talks about that over and over again. He always talks about, the people who worship Thursday. And I couldn't figure it out. So I just ignored it. And I was like, what does that mean? The people who worship Thursday. And, and the reason I had no idea what that meant is because I'm not an American. Every American probably already gets it. Every time he talks about the people who worship Thursday, well, who is he referring to? Americans. Americans. They have that holiday. What's it called? Oh, Thanksgiving. It's always on a Thursday. And it's only Americans, or pretty much only Americans, who have that holiday. But that holiday didn't exist at Nostradamus' time. So, very obvious that he's using something, just to give you an example of him using something, some terminology and some idiom that only people in the future would understand. Just as an example for that, because the rest of the verse I have no idea. But that's exactly the kind of idioms you would expect him to use if he really knows the future. And he uses those kinds of idioms a lot. And that's why I focused on this part that's coming up now, because this part talks about aspects that I at least know something about, right? Because he's using items, because he's using even slang and memes. We'll get to that, and all kinds of terminologies that he couldn't have known at that time, because he's using a lot of that stuff. You have to know those things, So, for example, if he's referencing a meme, and he is referencing a meme, we'll get to that, you would have to actually know that meme to get it, right? So you can only figure out things that you actually know something about. That's why I focused on these passages that are coming up, is because I at least know a little about it. But if you've never heard of the things he's referencing, you have no idea what he's talking about. And that's the point, that's to make sure that, people in the 1600s, wouldn't figure it out and burn him at the stake or whatever. Well, 1500s even, so the likelihood of being burned at the stake was even higher. So now we're back at the verses I talked about in my previous video. But now that I explained what I believe the angle is, I can talk about those things more directly and in more detail, and it will also hopefully make it easier to understand. The year 1999, 7th month. From the sky will come a great king of terror to bring back to life the great king of the Mongols, before and after Mars to reign by good luck. So the reason I usually start with this verse is simply because it's the only one with a precise date. So we have to start with this one and then use this as a reference frame for the following verses. There is only one significant event that happened in July of 1999, and that's the start of the persecution of Falun Gong. Now, I don't mention that because, I want to talk about Falun Gong. That's not the point, like I said, I have to start with this verse because, it's the only one that's precisely dated, and I mention Falun Gong because it's the start of the persecution of Falun Gong is the only major event of July 1999. And it's also the only thing that fits in context, and I'll get to that in a second. If you know some other event that happened in that month and that fits the context better, please tell me. But as long as I don't know of any other event that fits better, I'm just, I'm going to go with what fits best. So, the year 1999, 7th month, from the sky will come a great king of terror. I would argue that the start of a persecution, and it was, if you view it from a Western perspective, it didn't have too much impact in Europe or wherever. But if you view it from a global perspective, it had a major impact on China, and China, Chinese people make a major part of the world population. So seen from a global perspective, not just from a European perspective or an American perspective, but seen from a global perspective, this was a major event. It affected hundreds of millions of people in China, and it was the beginning of a very brutal persecution that is going on to this day, and countless people have been killed, countless people have been sent to forced labor camps for their belief, and so on. So yes, I would say that is a major event that happened in in at least in that month. Maybe it would even be a major event, just generally speaking. But certainly a major event for July 1999, right? Because we're only talking about that month. Some major event of July 1999, and something terrible because it talks about a great king of terror. So I don't know anything else that fits, because the start of such a major persecution is certainly something terrible, right? It was the start of a great terror, at least for the people in China, for the many millions of people in China who were persecuted, who were sent to forced labor camps, and so on. And also, to bring back to life the great king of the Mongols. So again, that gives us an Asian frame of reference, I really don't know anything, and I don't know of any other start of a great terror that, started in July of 1999 in Asia, The start of the persecution of Falun Gong is the only thing that fits. At least as far as I know, if like I said, if you know something that fits better, we'll go with that. Before and after Mars to wane by good luck. Again, it fits. The interpretation I gave you fits, and it's the only, really, it fits with this sentence as well. Because I already explained it in my previous video, and I gave you, I explained to you the way Nostradamus talks, right? He uses idioms and things that people would only be able to understand at that time, and not, for example, in the 16th century, right? He intentionally would do it that way because he doesn't want people in the 16th century to understand it. He wants people to, he has to do it that way. Otherwise, if people understand everything beforehand, it's not going to happen, right? So he's always phrasing things in a way that only makes it possible for people to figure out what he means at the time he's talking about. So people in the 1500s would have no idea what this might mean, right? But if you look at it from a modern perspective, what might Mars be an idiom of, right? Especially if you're talking about the persecution, or a great terror. Let's not even go with my interpretation. Let's just go with what is in the text. So we're talking about the start of a great terror that starts in July of 1999, and so the start of a great terror in July of 1999 is obviously somewhere in Asia, or at least we have an Asian reference because he talks about the great king of the Mongols. So obviously something to do with Asia, right? So so the start of the persecution of Falun Gong in China certainly fits all these previous passages, and it also fits this last line here. Now we can figure out what that might mean, keeping in mind that Nostradamus uses idioms before and after Mars, especially idioms that people in the past wouldn't understand. Before and after Mars to wane by good luck. So again, a lot of people interpreted that as, oh, well, he talks about Mars. He must be talking about astrology. We already ruled that out, right? He cannot talk about astrology. There's no way he could predict some of the things we talked about and some of the things we're going to talk about using astrology. No way. When we already ruled out astrology. So no, he's not. It's not astrology. So a lot of people weren't able to understand that sentence. But in the context we've established now, it makes sense, right? So what does Mars refer to? Keep in mind, we have that Asian reference, and obviously he's talking about China. A lot of people don't know that, but, king of the Mongols. The Mongols were actually part of China. Genghis Khan is actually regarded as an emperor of China, for instance, right? So we have that China reference. And if we know that it talks about China, and if we know that it talks about a religious minority being persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party, and if we know that the way Chinese people pronounce Marx is actually Mars, well, what might Mars refer to? Could it be Marx? Because that's actually, the way he's writing it here is actually the way, since we're talking about China, that is actually the way Chinese pronounce Marx, because they have a really hard time pronouncing X, so they just pronounce it Mars. So, and then this also makes sense. To reign by good luck. To reign. If it talks about a planet doesn't reign. So obviously not talking about the planet, obviously an idiom. And Marx makes sense. Marx is, well, not necessarily a ruler, but he is pretty much the leader or the father of the Communist Party, right? But of course he's dead now, right? So how can he... And this is precisely talking about July of 1999. So he's been long dead in July of 1999. So, but how could Marx still be ruling if he's long dead? Well, obviously not literally referring to Marx, but obviously referring to communism, which fits with that whole theme of the Communist Party starting the persecution of a religious minority in July of 1999, right? And it was a major persecution. It's still going on today. And millions of people have been sent to forced labor camps. And you know some of the aspects. And of course, in China, they're persecuting a lot of religious minorities. So it does have a major impact. And before and after. So before and after. So he makes that clear. So actually it fits, right? So yes, Marx is dead, but he makes it clear that, yes, even before. So of course, yes, before Marx was reigning, right? But he says, well, after he's reigning as well. Right, he's ruling before and after because of the Communist Party. They're worshipping him. Basically, of course, the Communist Party is atheist, but if there is any figure that they worship, it's Marx, right? And they're using his ideology and they're using his image. They're using Marxism to rule, right? So it fits, and by good luck, good luck is actually. This is a bit difficult to actually Google Translate. Where was it? No, that didn't I translate that before? Yeah. Here, Google Translate translates it as by happiness. So you can also see it as happiness. So you might ask, well, why does Marxism bring people happiness? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't say that it brings people happiness. It says that Marx is ruling by using happiness, by happiness. He's ruling by happiness. So obviously he's ruling by using happiness. It doesn't say he brings them happiness, but it says he's using happiness to rule, and that's exactly what Marxism is and Marxism does, right? The entire idea of Marxism and socialism and communism is, that there's like this paradise on earth, communism, right? And in communism, everyone would be happy. Obviously, in actual communist societies like China, people aren't too happy, especially if they get persecuted, no, they aren't actually happy, but they are promised happiness. The way Marxists come to power is always by promising people happiness, by saying, well, if we come to power, if we do a violent revolution and you let us rule your entire country and your entire economy, and you give us all the power, then we will implement communism. And communism isn't at all a bad thing. No, it's great. It's the perfect society. It's this utopia. It's this heaven on earth, this paradise on earth, where everyone is only happy. Everyone is gonna be happy. Everyone, if you give us absolute power, everyone the world over is gonna be so happy. Just trust us on that. That's the promise they always make, right? So they always rule by happiness, by the promise of happiness, by the false promise of happiness, but that's beside the point. So now, because we have that precise date and that frame of reference, we can go on to the next paragraph. The present time, together with the past, will be judged by the great jovialist. I always have a problem with that English word. Usually in English it's translated as Joker. Not. I already said that. Not the Joker from Batman. Jovialist. Well, anyway, I looked it up, and it in any case, it refers to, call it what you will, but in any case, it refers to a person associated with laughter, right? A person associated with laughter. So you could also call it a clown, but maybe not in that sense. In any case, keep that in mind, the association with laughter. So Joker is good. Joker is good because Joker is someone, Joker is someone associated with laughter. So it means someone associated with laughter, okay? The present time, together with the past, will be judged by the great jovialist, however you pronounce that, Joker. I'm just going to call it Joker. Will be, and a lot of translation actually use Joker. Will be judged by the great Joker. The world too late will be tired of him, and through the clergy or oath-taker disloyal. They will become disloyal through the clergy oath-taker because of, taking an oath to the great Joker, whoever that might be. Well, who might it be? We have our frame of reference now. So, who was in power in China? Who started the persecution of Falun Gong? Who was in power in China in July of 1999? Well, that was Jiang Zemin, right? The leader of the Communist Party at that time. Actually, the old Toad is still around, and that's one of his nicknames. It's Toad. Don't know why, but well, actually, he has two nicknames, and we'll get to that. Well, yeah, we should get to that now. Well, here he is, and you can see a lovely guy, right? There were also many images of him in like here. This is a nice image as well. You can really see. Okay, yeah. Well, communist dictator, basically. Oh, look at this. Here he is on. Oh, this is like a huge propaganda banner with him and Mao Zedong, and we probably know the other guys. Yeah. So communist dictator, right? The leader of the Communist Party of China at that time. And yeah, you can see, lovely guy. Also, sort of funny guy, but not in a good way. It's more like, you can see that people are making fun of him. Even though, of course, China, in China, people are afraid of him, but even so, they're still making fun of him. You can see why. I mean, he looks ridiculous, right? So, you can see why people might be making fun of him, calling him a clown, not taking him seriously, and you can see why he got his nickname of, you can see why people call him a clown, and you can see why he got the nickname of Toad. Because, well, honestly, he kind of looks like a toad, a little. He does look like a toad, a little. Yeah, and there's a whole meme about that. They even mean that in a good way sometimes. They're like, there's a bunch of communists like on the internet in China that genuinely like him, and even they call him a toad. but they mean that in a good way. They mean that affectionately. Oh, and they call themselves toad lovers or toad fans. You know, so even the communists that actually like and praise him are calling him a toad. And as you can see here in this article, toad in Chinese means well. Well, one form of it, as you can see here, is ha ha. Okay, so this is the character for ha. This is again is ha. So ha ha. You know, this is one form of his nickname of Toad. You know, but it means toad in Chinese, but it's pronounced ha ha. And so yeah, it you can see how that all fits together now, right? So he was the leader of the Communist Party in July 1999. He ordered the persecution of Falun Gong, and his nickname is Ha Ha. So you can see how that might relate to choker. How would you call someone like that? Especially if you want to, how would you refer to someone like that if you didn't want people to figure out who you are referring to before it happened? Well, you would use those kinds of memes, right? And it also proves that, Nostradamus must have had some kind of gift, because without actually being able to see the future, there's no way to know that on an internet meme, how would people in the 1500s know about an internet meme where he's called Ha Ha, right? That's his name, his nickname on the internet. And it's big. It's big. It's not just some small thing. It's big. It's all over China, Well, of course, you have to know about Chinese things, right? So, of course, it's difficult for people in the West to understand that. And that's why I'm doing this explanation, because I know some of those things about China, so I can explain that. But, without knowing what Nostradamus is referencing, you'd have no idea, right? But it fits perfectly. It fits with the previous passage. It's obviously chunks. I mean, it fits perfectly. And the nickname fits, ha ha, choker, ha ha. So the present time together with the past will be judged by the great ha ha. The world too late will be tired of him, and through the clergy oath-taker disloyal. So if we view it in the light, of the previous passage, so obviously because, people are going along with his orders to persecute religious minorities and so on, because people are following him. They... How should I explain this? Yeah, so people are following him. Yeah, he's in charge of the Communist Party. People all over in China have to follow him. Yes, he is the judge over the present and the past. Well, what does that mean? Well, you probably know that quote from Orwell. He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls... no, what? Maybe I should look it up. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. And that's sort of what communist leaders, communist dictators do. They control the present, but they also control the past. How do they control the past? Well, those famous... I'm gonna Google it again. Well, here's one way in which communist leaders not only control the present, but also control the past. And Orwell actually referenced that as well. There's this famous pictures, and there's many more images like that, So, he's been unpersoned. He never existed. That's how they would alter the past, obviously, he fell out of favor, and he was persecuted to death. Stalin basically had him killed. And of course, because he had him, he can't just kill him just like that. Before he can kill him, he has to make up a reason to kill him, right? So they make up all those lies about him and slander him. And, well, he was actually a bad person. So it wasn't, as you can see, he's at the side of Stalin. So, of course, he did some bad things that we're not going to go into now because that would take too long. But before they killed him, they demonized him, which in his case really wasn't too hard. But because they had to demonize him in order to kill him, they now have a problem because, oh, look, here's a photo of him together with Stalin. Well, no, there isn't. The photo never existed. Because they don't just destroy the photo, they make up a new photo. It's the same photo, but he's gone, And of course, they just, today we would use Photoshop, but they actually did all of that by hand. They manipulated that image by hand, so it looks like he was never there. So, and that's one instance in which, one way for communists to not only control the present, but to control the past. So the present time together with the past will be judged by the great choker. The world too late will be tired of him, and through the clergy oath-taker disloyal. So they followed along with him, followed along with his persecution, and had him as their leader. And yes, they will be tired of him. You can see right now they're already very tired of him, always making fun of him, calling him ha-ha. So now they're tired of him, but it's too late because he already started his persecution. He already, and even though he's no longer actually in power now, or he's no longer the official head of the Communist Party in China, he still has a lot of power, and a lot of the things he took, he put in place, are still working. In the Communist Party in China, it's still mainly the people he appointed. So in that way, even though he himself is no longer in power, he still has, controls things behind the scenes and still has power behind the scenes because he put the people, or most of the people that have power in the Communist Party in China now were appointed by him. And now, of course, increasingly he loses power. Increasingly, people are tired of him, are making fun of him, are calling him haha. But it's too late. He already persecuted everyone he wanted to persecute and so on. So the world too late will be tired of him. And because they followed him, they become disloyal. How are they becoming disloyal? Well, they're becoming disillusioned, right? And increasingly, the people who followed him and who might at that time have been, very devout communists, are increasingly becoming disillusioned now because, Jiang Zemin did a lot of bad things, and actually through his actions put the whole Communist Party in China in a crisis. As you know, right now the Communist Party in China is in a huge crisis. They're trying to cover it up, but I think now everyone, even in the West, knows that. Jiang Zemin played a big part in creating those in creating that crisis, or in creating the conditions which now are leading to crisis. So people who previously followed him are now becoming disillusioned and are now becoming disloyal, not only to him, but to the entire Communist Party, which then, of course, puts the Communist Party in an even greater crisis. You might have heard about that. It was just a few days ago. It was reported that the People's Liberation Army, the army of the Communist Party in China, is now introducing helmets that have explosives embedded in the helmet, and that can be remote controlled by the superior. So the idea is that if a soldier in the People's Liberation Army misbehaves or doesn't follow orders, all the superior has to do is press a button and his helmet will explode, his head will explode. Okay, so you can see people being disloyal to the Communist Party is obviously a huge problem. So the next verse is the year of the great seventh number accomplished, it will appear at the time of the games of slaughter. This is again maybe not translated perfectly. A better way to translate it would probably be, it will become obvious at the times of the games of slaughter. Not far from the great millennial age, when the buried will go out from their tombs. So, since we have that reference is of 1999, so and since this is one of the passages immediately afterwards, so the year of the great seventh number accomplished. Well, that obviously then refers to 2007, and the year of the great seventh number accomplished. Well, that then refers to 2008. The year of the great seventh number. So 07, right? The year of the great seventh number, 07. And the year accomplished is 08. So 2008, especially with the reference of the previous events being 1999. What happened in 2008, especially in light of China? Well, the Olympic Games happened. The Olympic Games happened in 2008 in China. And so it says here, right? It will become obvious at the time of the games of slaughter. Now, again, he's using an idiom that would only make sense for people at that time. And actually, since we're already past that, again, to people of this time, it again actually doesn't make sense anymore, at least if they haven't lived through 2008. Well, okay, they would be very young then, but someone who doesn't know the events associated with the Olympic Games in China wouldn't know that. But at that time, critics all over the world, of course, a lot of people were criticizing the Olympic Committee for giving the Olympic Games to China, especially at a time when they were persecuting a lot of religious minorities, and were also involved in a lot of other genocides. So because of that, critics all over the world at that time were calling the Olympic Games in China the genocide games. The genocide games. So, of course, again, Nostradamus couldn't say genocide because that term in that form didn't really exist at that time. So what word would you use if the word genocide doesn't exist yet? Especially if you're talking about a genocide associated with Olympic Games. What would you say? Well, you would say games of slaughter, or more precisely, you would use the term he's using in French. He says games of hectacombe. And it's translated as games of slaughter because people today don't know what hectacombe means. Hectacomp. What is Hectacomp? Well, and now we also know that he's actually talking about Olympic Games. There's no doubt about it. He has to be talking about Olympic Games. Why? Because Hectacomp were mass slaughterings of animals in Olympic stadiums. That was part of the original Olympic Games. In ancient times, the original Olympic Games in antiquity. As part of every Olympic game, before the games started, they would have a hectacomp, meaning they would lead hundreds of animals into the Olympic Stadium, and as part of the Olympic ceremony back then, those animals would be mass slaughtered as a ritualistic sacrifice to their gods. So that's what hectacomp means. And hectacomp always took place in Olympic stadiums and as part of the Olympic Games. So very clear that it's referring to the Olympic Games, especially since it's obviously talking about 2008 and we have that reference to China established in the previous verses. And it's also a very clever way of referencing the genocide games. And clearly, it's talking about genocide. This is the hectacomp is the word I would use for genocide if the word genocide didn't exist yet. Of course, hectacomp is referring to the mass slaughtering of animals, not of humans. But it's obvious that he's not talking about animals. He is talking about the mass slaughtering, the genocide of humans, because here in the last sentence, when the buried will go out from their tombs. Okay, so obviously, people have been slaughtered and now they're buried. Animals are not buried in tombs, at least not usually. So obviously he's not talking about the slaughtering of animals. He's actually talking about the slaughtering of humans, talking about genocide. Which also, is in line with the previous passages referencing persecution and so on. And again, here we have not far from the great millennial age. Again, reinforcing that he really must be talking about 2007 and 2008 because it's not far from the millennium, right? It's just shortly after the millennium. Well, of course, another meaning of this sentence here could be that he might be also talking about, about some mythical epoch in the future. But let's not go into that. That would get too spiritual, I guess. Oh, and and a lot of people have also. I don't want to get too spiritual because if you get too spiritual or go too much into astrology and stuff, you'll get it wrong, and that's why a lot of people can't figure it out. Don't get too spiritual and don't get too much into astrology and stuff like that. Otherwise, it's just it's just gonna confuse you. Because a lot of people couldn't understand this last sentence here either. So they were like, when the buried will go out from their tombs. Well, is he talking about zombies? No, he's not talking about zombies. Obviously, if you view it in the line of the previous passages and what they might mean, well, since we're talking about genocide and persecution, obviously that this then signifies redemption. Maybe the end of whatever genocide he's referencing. Well, obviously he's referencing the genocides, the many genocides actually that China is involved in. So that would signify that maybe an end to that, and of course I do hope that especially all the genocides China is still involved in now, and you probably all know that, and also what's going on in Xinjiang. I mean, they're persecuting all kinds of religious minorities, right? I mean, they're also persecuting the Tibetans, they're persecuting the Muslims, they're persecuting the Christians, they're persecuting any every religion pretty much. Everyone that first believes in their God and then believes in the Communist Party. You must not do that. If you do that, you'll get persecuted no matter what your religion is, because you first have to believe in the Communist Party, and of course the Communist Party is actually atheist, so it's it's a contradiction anyway, right? Because if you first believe in the atheist Communist Party and then in your God, you're not actually believing in your God, are you? So as long as you're actually believing in your God, you'll get persecuted. Only if you believe in the atheist Communist Party first and foremost, and actually by doing that sort of deny the authority of your God, only then will they not persecute you. I also want to make clear that, just because I think Nostradamus is talking about certain people or a certain group, that doesn't mean I necessarily, support that group. It also doesn't necessarily mean I don't support that group. It's just, all that means is that I simply think that this interpretation makes sense, right? So if I mention a group or a person, I simply mean that it makes sense that Nostradamus is referring to that. It don't see it as an endorsement, or at least, not necessarily. Because now we get to a passage that in my previous video I actually had some difficulty figuring it out. So I made the mistake of giving it a too spiritual explanation, which, like I just said, is actually usually wrong. So I was like, because, okay, I'll read you the passage. Long awaited, he will never return. In Europe, he will appear in Asia. One of the league issued from the great Hermes, and he will grow over all the kings of the East. So, because it says he will grow over all the kings, I was sort of, interpreting that passage in a spiritual light or in a religious light, and I was like, oh, maybe he's talking about some kind of Messiah or something. But now I actually don't think that anymore, because I couldn't figure out who he was referring to. And actually, I made that little disclaimer of not, that just because I mentioned someone doesn't mean I necessarily endorse them. The reason I mentioned that is because in the passage that follows now, I actually think he's talking about Trump. But then I was like, well, maybe he's also talking about Trump in this passage. But then I was like, no, that doesn't make sense. Trump is not a messiah. And, well, first off, I don't necessarily think that passage is referring to a messiah anymore anyway. But I still was like, well, even if it's not referring to any kind of messiah, and of course there are people who believe Trump to be some sort of messiah, which I think is completely ridiculous. Anyway, even if you don't see Trump as a messiah, it doesn't make it doesn't make sense, yeah, it doesn't make sense anyway, So I wasn't sure about the whole Messiah thing, and obviously it's not referring to Trump. And I don't know if it, I don't know what it. I didn't know what it was referring to, and obviously can't be referring to Trump anyway, because in Europe he will appear in Asia. So he was in Europe and he was in Asia. I mean, sure, Trump visited Europe and Asia, but he also visited every other place on Earth. Nothing significant connecting Trump with Europe and Asia. That doesn't make any sense. So I was like, well, the next passage, in my opinion, talks about Trump. So, but obviously this passage here couldn't be about Trump. Well, no, it's not about Trump, but now I think I figured out who it is about. So let's look at the next passage, because we do actually still need the next passage to understand the previous passage. The great Senate will ordain the triumph for one who afterwards will be vanquished, driven out. At the sound of the trumpet of his adherents, there will be put up for sale their possessions, enemies expelled. Okay, this is the cumulation of everything we talked about, and it's also I think one of the verses where Nostradamus uses his idioms and his his words that sound the same the most. So this is also one of the passages that is the most difficult for translators to translate, because if you don't understand what he's referring to, you can't translate it correctly. So the translation here is actually wrong. So we actually have to use the original French text if we want to make sense of it. So it says the great Senate will ordain the triumph. But if you look at the French text, it doesn't actually say triumph. It says pom. How do you even pronounce it? My French is really bad, so I don't even know. Would you pronounce it Pompey, or would you? Yeah, you would. No, would you pronounce it Pomp or Pompey? Well, anyway, you can see it's written Pompey. So the great Senate will ordain the Pompey, because Pompey doesn't actually mean triumph. That's just the way the translator translated it, because he didn't know how to translate that word. Well, in my opinion, it's not a word; it's a name. So it actually says the great Senate will ordain Pompey, and which in my opinion, of course, refers to Mike Pompeo, who was the Secretary of State under Trump, and of course Trump appointed him as Secretary of State. But before you can become a Secretary of State, the Senate still has to vote on it. So the Senate voted on it and ordained him as the Secretary of the State. So the great Senate will ordain Pompey. For one who afterwards will be vanquished, driven out. Again, fits perfectly. So the great Senate ordained Pompeo for Trump. For one who afterwards will be vanquished, driven out. For Trump, because Trump was just driven out, well, of the presidency. But a lot of people even are saying, a lot of people on the left are even saying, well, Trump is so terrible and he's committed so many crimes. Yes. I don't even know what crimes did he commit. But okay, let's not get into this. Anyway, a lot of people on the left saying, no, it's not enough to just have driven Trump out of the seat of the president. No. It's not enough to have driven Trump out of the White House. No, and they emphasized it a lot, driving him out of the White House, because they had that theory that he would refuse to leave, and they were saying, well, if he refuses to leave the White House, we'll have to drive him out of the White House. But just driving him out of the White House wasn't enough for them, and now they're talking about, no, we have to drive him out of America, and a lot of left-wing media are speculating that, Trump will have to go into hiding, and he will have to leave the country, and because of his many crimes, because he's just such a terrible person, he better go into hiding, and he better be driven out. So the great Senate will ordain the great Senate will ordain Pompeo for one who afterwards will be vanquished, driven out, Trump. At the sound of the trumpet, well, now you also know what that might refer to. Again, it doesn't actually say trumpet, of course, well, it doesn't say. Well, you can see what it says, or how, well, it is a trumpet, but you can see how it's written in the original. It's written Trump. Trump. Well, actually, yeah. Again, you would probably pronounce that Trump. Yeah, you would actually pronounce that Trump in French. At the sound of the Trump of his adherents, well, again, actually, this whole sentence is mistranslated because he still thinks, the translator still thinks it's referring to an actual trumpet, when in light of the previous sentences, it obviously refers to Trump, and it actually says Trump. This is pronounced Trump right here. Okay, so and Trump was the one, Trump was the one for whom Pompeo was ordained by the Senate, and Trump was afterwards vanquished, driven out. Right, so it makes perfect sense, and it actually says Trump, but because the translator is still thinking he's talking about a trumpet, he's mistranslating the sentence and translating it as at the sound of the trumpet of his adherents. No, that doesn't make sense, because he's not talking about he's not talking about an actual trumpet, is he? But the translator wasn't aware of that because obviously he translated that before Trump was even a thing. My French is so bad. But we have to figure this one out in French, because we can't go by the translation in this instance at all, because the translator couldn't make any sense of the references. So the translator translated Trump as trumpet, and actually I have to admit I actually had to look that up myself. But trumpet in French isn't even Trump at all. This is not a word in French at all. It's just obviously the name Trump written in French. That's how you would pronounce it in French. So it's not a word at all. It doesn't mean trumpet. Trumpet in French is an entirely different word. But because the translator, of course, didn't know that this was a reference to Trump, he had no way to translate it, and just sort of assumed he must mean trumpet, even though it doesn't actually say trumpet at all. This is not the word for trumpet in French. It just says, in French, you just pronounce it Trump. It's just French for Trump. And again, here, so because he translated that as trumpet, he's translating that as sound of the trumpet. But again, that's not actually what it means. This word, sonde Trump, it doesn't mean sound of the trumpet. It's just because there was no other way for the translator to translate this, So, but what do you think it means, right? So his adherents, Trump, his adherents, it actually means if you keep that, if you keep in mind that this means Trump, which it does, it means his adherents will assemble at the son of Trump. It doesn't mean sound of trumpet. It means son of Trump. His adherents assemble at the son of Trump, which again, if you read it in light of it referring to Trump, makes a lot of sense. So again, the next sentence. Again, this is not what. Oh God, I mean, this translator isn't even so bad. It's just that But that's my point. It's actually impossible to translate. It's actually impossible to translate before the events that he's talking about, because you have no idea what he's referencing, so you don't know what it means, and if you don't know what it means, you cannot translate it. So that's why the translators are always having a hard time. I mean, how would they translate it 20 or 40 or 50 or 100 years ago? How would he know that this is a reference to Trump? No, no way. But if you realize that it's a reference to Trump, or even if you just assume that it's a reference to Trump, it makes sense. And if you don't know that, there's no way to translate it correctly. Put up for sale their possessions, enemies expelled. Um, yeah, one translation, one translation as actually gives it as, well, destroy enemies is wrong too, but publish goods, enemies destroyed. That's pretty much how I would translate it. Publish goods, enemies destroyed. Yeah, put up for sale their possessions. Well, I guess you could. It's publish goods. I don't know that publish goods, enemies destroyed. So just keep that in mind that it can also mean that. But in any case, now we can go back to the previous passage, and now you can see why I now think this actually might be referring to Pompeo, right? Because Pompeo was stationed in Europe, and then when he was the head of the CIA, and when he when he worked as Secretary of State, um, well, he was a lot in Asia. He focused on Asia a lot, um, and he was actually stationed, previously, and that was during the Cold War. He was actually stationed as a soldier in Europe. So it doesn't fit Trump, but since in the next sentence it's actually talking about Pompeo, or at least we're gonna assume it's talking about Pompeo, it fits Pompeo. Okay, so let's go on then um to the paragraph afterward. Uh, da, da, da. So the adherents of the order of Q writes. Again, that here the translator didn't even know at all what that might have been referring to. Of course, I have an idea, but there was no way the translator would have known that back then. So the adherents of the order of Cubites banished their possessions given their adversaries. All their benefits will be taken as misdeeds, fleet dispersed, delivered to the corsairs. I didn't actually know that word corsairs, but I looked it up. It actually just means like pirates, I think. Um, so the adherents of the order of Cubites. I already talked about that in detail in my previous video, so I won't go too much into detail this time. Needless to say that I think this is referring to followers of Q. Banish their possessions given to their adversaries. All their benefits will be taken as misdeeds. Right. At least that's how they would see it, right? Especially in regard to Trump. Everything Trump does, or everything Trump did, and everything his followers did, everything they're doing, be it good or bad or whatever, it's always taken to be misdeeds. It's always seen as being bad. No matter what they do, even if they really do good things, it's always seen as misdeeds, or presented as misdeeds. Or at least, that's how they feel. That's how Trump feels, and that's how the followers of Q feel, the Q-vites. I think I'm just gonna call them Q-vites in the future. Hey, this is nice. This is a good way to avoid the YouTube censorship, because I'm just not gonna say Q or QAnon anymore. I'm just gonna say Q-vites from now on. So the adherents of the order of Q-vites banished their possessions given their adversaries. All their benefits will be taken as misdeeds. That's exactly how they feel. Yeah, and regarding that, I just saw a an article, and it talks about obviously QAnon followers um, trying, it's related to the to the breach of the Capitol, and it talks how even before that, before it talks about how even before January 6th, 30, you can see that here we have about 30 to 40 of us. So 30 to 40 Q Anon followers, or at least alleged QAnon followers, were trying to breach the Capitol even before the events of January 6th. And of course, they've all been arrested, which I think fits perfectly with what Nostradamus is saying here. 30 adherents of the Order of Cubites banished their possession given their adversaries. Okay, I don't quite know what that's referring to, but given their possessions given their adversaries. Well, if you're very right winged and you're very much opposed to socialism, and you think that what's his face? What was the guy who came after Trump? I'm not very good with politics, American politics. Oh yeah, Biden, right? So a lot of people they don't actually accuse Biden of being a socialist, but they certainly accuse Kamala Harris of being a socialist, who they think that is actually controlling things. So anyway, a lot of people are accusing the Biden administration of being made up of socialists. What do socialists do? And we already had that in the previous passage as well. Put up for sale their possessions. It doesn't actually say put up for sale. But again, here it says, and that's actually what it says. Well, their possessions. It means their possessions given up. Right? The possessions, and that's what socialists do. They, they want to eliminate property. So they want to, and especially certainly when it comes to Q followers, and to capitalists or whoever they deem to be capitalists, they certainly want to take away the possessions from them. So 30 adherents of the Order of Cubites banished their possessions given their adversaries. All their benefits will be taken as misdeeds. Fleet dispersed, delivered to the corsairs, pirates. I don't know what that refers to. Maybe this is something that hasn't happened yet. But actually, you've probably seen that. Just a few days ago, Q followers all speculated. I'm going to call them Q-rights. So just a few days ago, the Q-rights they all published various videos. Sadly, a lot of them have been deleted by YouTube and so on. But they published a lot of videos showing a huge fleet of what appears to be, some of them don't appear to be warships, just a huge fleet of ships, but they assume most of them are military ships, and some of them do look like military ships. Most of them look like military ships, yes. So this has been going, through, all the Cubites, all the Cubites talked about that and posted various videos about that, showing a huge fleet of military ships off the west coast. I'm just going to show you one of those videos.
Are you serious? Are you serious? Guys, there is a ton of military ships that are off the coast of California that have just been spotted. They're coming in from every direction, kind of very stunning. Let me show you some clips here, and very, very, very stunning situation, to say the least. I can tell you that. Let me see. look at this. Okay, I'm sorry for the video being a little shaky, but I mean this is just off the coast of California, off the coast of Los Angeles, and they're trying their best to get this footage here for you. I'm doing my best, but look at them. Look at all the ships. Just look at this, and I mean there's tons of them. Military. There's all kinds of frigates and destroyers.
So anyway, you get the idea. So actually, just now, this was a huge topic among the Q followers, and they have all kinds of theory. They think it's related to Trump or to to. I'm not even gonna go into what they think. There's a lot of theories about that. And I don't know. I just wanted to mention that maybe that is what he's referring to. It depends on how this plays out, because this is actually happening just now. So I don't know how that's gonna play out, and if that's gonna be important or if it turns out to be nothing. I don't know. Because these things are still unfolding. So I don't know what's gonna happen, but maybe this is what Nostradamus was referring to. I don't know. I'm just putting it out there as a possibility, and if that's actually the case or not, that the future is gonna show that. And because now we're actually not just in the present, but actually now we're starting to go beyond the present and go into the future. And like I said, I gotta stop here, and I stopped at this point in my previous video. I actually even stopped before. I stopped before the ships in my previous video, because that didn't even transpire yet at that time. But yeah, generally speaking, I would say you have to stop at you can't go beyond the present, and I already explained the reason for that. It's simply because the way Nostradamus is wording it is you can see that now, right? You can see because from the examples I gave, he's intentionally wording it in a way that's almost impossible to figure out beforehand, but because he's using so much terminology and knowledge that would only come about at that time. But then when it happens, you can see, oh yeah, okay, he's then you can understand it if you know the references, and then you can then becomes pretty obvious that is what he's referring to. But without knowing the references, it becomes almost impossible. So I'm not gonna speculate about the future, because it's just I don't know the future, and if I speculate too much, I'll get it wrong. But I am going to read you the next verse, even though I think this verse is now actually about the future. Just go figure it out yourself. Okay, I'm just going to read you the next verse. And if you keep in mind what I said before and the interpretation regarding the previous verses, I'll think you'll be able to figure it out yourself. Okay, so the next verse is: sudden joy to sudden sadness, it will occur at Rome, for the grace is embraced. Grief, cries, tears, weeping, blood, excellent mirth. Excellent mirth? Yes, okay. Contrary bands, surprised and thrust up. Contrary bands. Bands. Does he mean like in the sense of opposing parties? Opposing parties surprised and thrust up. Well, it doesn't. Okay, I'm not gonna interpret that. But since I already mentioned the QAnon, well, it wasn't actually QAnon, the videos by Q followers about the fleet of ships, and they have some theories regarding that I'm not gonna go into too much, but they do connect that with Trump, right? So I just thought it was interesting and thought, hey, maybe that's the fleet of ships that Nostradamus is talking about. I don't know for sure. It depends on how it plays out, right? But since I already mentioned that, I'm also gonna mention that also the last couple of days, QAnon followers have increasingly been talking about about Italy and about Rome, and they have a lot of theories regarding Rome and Italy, and how Rome and Italy also play a role in the events regarding Trump. I won't get into that again because these are events that are just now unfolding. So I don't know how they play out, and I don't know if that is what Nostradamus is referring to. But well, by the time I publish this video, maybe more information will have come out, and maybe you can now, determine for yourself if maybe that was what Nostradamus was hinting at or not.